Well, the main reason behind them trying to improve their network automation and their service automation is really a fact of they have to lower costs. When we look back, and just using mobile networks as an example, when we look back from 2006 to 2017, we saw over that time period a steady increase in the amount of OpEx that's going towards keeping these networks operating. And that's just not a sustainable trend. So the first thing they want to do is figure out a way to arrest that increase in OpEx, but they really, really want to ultimately completely change that trajectory and make it much, much lower cost. So with the work that we do with our telecom panel, for example, the operators tell us that as they look forward to 5G, they really want to eliminate about a third of the OpEx in their network. And the only way to do that, and a big part of that elimination, is to get people out of the equation, to move to a situation where you've got fewer people in the loop and the processes are much, much more automated. Well, there are a number of pretty significant challenges here. And by the way, NFV and SDN, so network functions virtualization and software-defined networking, are two of the really key technologies to be brought to bear to automate these networks and these services. And particularly NFV is kind of revolutionary in networks. It's a very, very different way of building and operating networks. And it's just taken quite a lot of time for operators to understand how this is supposed to work, how do they implement this technology. And it's taken a long time for vendors to be able to provide the sort of products and services that'll help them do that. SDN is a little bit easier because it's a little bit less revolutionary, more evolutionary. It's a question of building networks basically in the same way, but with a little bit different kind of a control mechanism. And so when we look at our research, we try and document how are people making these transitions. What do we think needs to be put in place to make those transitions, and so on. So we track quite a bit of data to help us figure out where the network, where the industry is, and what's going on with networking. And we do see, the good news is we do see people moving forward and kind of embracing some of these challenges, and in fact getting beyond these challenges. So for example, in 2018, we saw a pretty radical increase in the amount of money being spent on orchestration, which is a really key indicator that people are moving forward with automation in that NFV context. So we remain very, very hopeful that people are being able to get through these challenges. Other kinds of data that we are tracking is when we interview operators and ask them what they're doing, how they're approaching automation, we definitely see some very big increases in their ability to do things, for example, in the enterprise services domain, or in the wide area network. So those are the products, and that's on the SDN side. So those are the things that are being a little bit more evolutionary, and people are making some very, very good progress. They're getting through those challenges. And we think that the next big challenge to get through is to think about things much more holistically. So to go from planning around a particular type of service, say SD-WAN for automation, or a particular type or part of the network like the packet core, and to think much more end-to-end. And now we think that's really the grounds for the new challenges that people are starting to face. And to be able to handle those challenges is going to take some sort of a horizontal platform. We call it the Digital Network and Operations Platform, but other people may use different terminology. But fundamentally, it means putting some digital infrastructure in place on which many different kinds of services and different kinds of workloads can be provided to do useful work, to do particular use cases, for example, that a carrier might need to do. For example, to handle a new 5G network on top of this type of platform. So we think that's the new frontier, and there are new technologies, for example, containerization, Kubernetes, that are coming to bear on that problem. But that's a whole nother thing. And we do think we're going to see here, as we've seen in the past, is some progress, and then maybe there's some stasis for a while, fits and starts, until people really grasp the next level of technology challenge and organizational challenge in order to make these things progress along the way to more end-to-end automation. Yes, we have discovered some best practices, and we've done this through a series of interviews with carriers globally, as well as looking at very specific cases. So, for example, we've written a case study on Telenor, we've written another one on Turkcell, and so on and so forth. And what we look for when we talk to a range of operators is sort of common trends. And what we look for when we do case studies is to say, what happened in this particular case, and what can we draw from that for other operators who may be faced with similar challenges. So through all the work that we do, I think there's some really, really key best practice. One is it really has to come from above. If there's no senior management activity that says, this is where we're going, this is the vision I have, and this is how we're going to meet this vision, then we found that there's basically no hope. You really need that kind of direction from above, and it has to be sustained. The second thing is, as an operator, you have to build an ecosystem. And frankly, even as a vendor, you have to build an ecosystem because nobody's going to go this alone. It's too complicated. There are too many pitfalls that can befall somebody along the way. So you really have to build that ecosystem of trusted partners that can work together to get something accomplished. There is really a cultural change here. So I put this at kind of number 3, but it's really number 1. There's reskilling that has to be done. People have to know that their jobs are going to change, and they have to have a sense of what those changes are going to be. And they have to have some training and some encouragement. Again, that upper management comes back into play here to reskill. The other piece of that cultural change has to be that people buy software and develop it and incorporate it into their day-to-day work in a very different kind of way. So we need some more flexible arrangements in terms of how this technology is provided and delivered to the operators. For example, it can be delivered on a private cloud, it can be delivered on a public cloud, it can be delivered as software as a service, so SaaS. And these are all kind of new ways of procuring and delivering software. And therefore, the procurement systems actually have to be put in place to allow people to do this. So they're kind of the biggest things. I would say also one has to break this down into a series of steps. So not to be thinking that this is one big process with a beginning and an end, and then all of a sudden something magic happens and happy days. It really has to be done sort of a step at a time with some very deliberate steps being put in place and managed from a beginning point to an end point. All this stuff is very, very critical, and if these steps aren't followed, then we found that things don't proceed as quickly or as well as they would otherwise, and we don't get that kind of cost reduction that we're looking for in automation. Because we think this is such a big issue for the business of the carriers, we approach it actually from 4 different perspectives with 4 different research programs. There's a little bit of overlap by design in these programs, but they fundamentally focus on 4 different issues of automation. The first one, if you think about the bottom of the stack, if you will, is we have a program called Digital Infrastructure Strategies, which looks at the servers, the compute and whatnot that sit underneath the network and provide that common base, that horizontal platform, if you will. On top of that, we have a program called Network Automation and Orchestration, which looks at the end-to-end networking issues that arise, particularly as one moves from a physical network to a more virtual network. Then above that, we have a program called Automated Assurance, which looks at the assurance end-to-end of the services that run over that network. And then finally, we have a program called Service Design and Orchestration, which looks at the way service design is moving to a much more automated approach, a much more model-based approach. So ultimately, there's a flow through from the service to the network, to the assurance of that service, and it all runs over that horizontal platform. Now we have a 5th program that doesn't directly relate to the term here, automation and orchestration, as much as it's the network itself. So that program is called Next Generation Networks, and that looks at the way that networks are evolving from LTE to 5G network. And it just so happens that automation is critical, of course, to the way 5G networks are being built. So therefore, that's kind of the connection with that program to the automation. So really, we take these 5 different programs and we look end to end at our research to try to make sure that we provide the kind of information that our clients need in order to make sense and to make really, really good progress as they try and automate their networks and their operations.